Hello, and welcome to Eastern Roman history. Leontius's rebellion was not the first successful usurpation in the 7th century. Phocas had overthrown Maurus, Heraclius had overthrown Phocas, and Constans II's general Valentine had dethroned Heraclonus and Martina. However, Leontius's rebellion would spell the end of the Heraclian dynasty, and forced the empire to enter a 22-year period of instability, marked by usurpations and anarchy which left the empire open to a full-scale invasion which could have destroyed the empire in the Great Arab Siege of Constantinople in 717. A strategos of both Anatolikon and Hellas, a successful general and an Isaurian, Leontius, who ruled from 695 to 698, proved to be quite an able choice as emperor, who ruled for 3 years from 695 to 698. It was Leontius' decision, which, in hindsight, for him was a very bad one, to spare the life of Justinian II. Instead, he mutilated and exiled him out of respect for Constantine IV. He even tried to save Theodosius and Stephen, the chief ministers of Justinian II, but could not control the mob. As a result, both of these ministers were burned alive. Of what Leontius actually did during his reign, there is little record. Theophanes says Leontius was made emperor and remained in peace on all sides. Page 369, AD 695 to 696. Nicephorus the Patriarch skipped straight to his loss of Africa. I speculate that Leontius must have spent this time establishing himself as emperor. His inaction may have been an attempt to cut back on spending after the mounting cost of Justinian II's reign. In 696, Al-Walid sacked Malatia. Prince Sergius of Lazica, the son of Barnukios, transferred Iberia from Roman to Arab rule. In 697, Africa was overrun by the Arabs, and Carthage was captured, having been under Roman control since its reconquest by Belisarius in the reign of Justinian the Great in 534. Leontius immediately reacted by sending the Carabisianoi troops to recapture the province. John was placed in command of the fleet and drove out the Arabs in Carthage. It is likely that the Arabs had few troops due to fighting the Berbers at the time. Abd al-Malik sent a large army to thwart the Romans in 698, which they did, and thus Africa was lost forever. Regrouping on Crete, while en route to seek reinforcements, the officers of the Carabisianoi, fearing the wrath of Leontius for their failure, proclaimed Apsimar, Drungarius of the Kiberaeots, emperor. Meanwhile, Leontius returned the Cypriots Justinian II had relocated back to Cyprus. He also cleaned the Neorian harbour of Constantinople. In addition, another bout of bubonic plague struck Constantinople and lasted for 4 months, killing many people. In 698, Apsimar besieged Constantinople. Bribing the commanders of the Balakanai, Apsimaros entered the capital. The Marines started to loot the city by stealing into people's houses and plundering their belongings. Apsimar captured Leontius and cut off his nose. He then exiled him to the monastery of St. Delmatos. Leontius's loyalists were flogged, exiled, and had their property confiscated. This Apsimar had been renamed Tiberius on Crete and was now Emperor Tiberius III. There is not much to say about the reign of Leontius. His only real failure, the loss of Africa, was more Apsimar's fault than his own. Of the few facts that are known about his reign, they tell us that Leontius was quite popular. He focused on internal rather than external exertions and adequately responded to the African crisis when it occurred. One might criticize his laissez-faire approach to the raiding into Anatolia, but Leontius may have needed to consolidate what troops he had after the consistent failures of the latter years of Justinian II. Either way, by all accounts, he was a good emperor. Having deposed Leontius, Tiberius III Absimar, who ruled from 698 to 705, appointed his brother Heraclius, the man he could trust most, as supreme commander of Anatolikon, Armeniakon, Thraxikion, and Opsikion strategiae. He took charge of the thematic cavalry and was sent to protect Cappadocia. In 699, there appears to have been an outbreak of plague in Constantinople. Heraclius launched an offensive against the Arabs. He led a punitive expedition into Syria, crushed an Arab army from Antioch, and reached Samosata, raiding everything in his path. Theophanes reports that 200,000 Arabs were killed. Heraclius captured many prisoners and much loot, and safely returned to Roman territory. However, Tiberius in the meantime made no effort to save Africa. Instead, he created the Strategia of Sicily, which comprised Sicily and Calabria, and the Strategia of Sardinia, made up of Corsica, the Balearic Islands, and of course Sardinia itself. Though he did not retake Africa, he could at least provide for the defence of the remaining Roman possessions in the west. In 700, the Caliph Abd al-Malik launched an invasion of Roman Armenia, led by Abdullah. He captured Theodosiopolis and reached the Hexopolis in western Armenia. Muhammad, the brother of Abd al-Malik, captured eastern Armenia. Muhammad, brother of Abd al-Malik, at the same time as Abdullah's campaign, captured eastern Armenia. Tiberius and Heraclius did nothing to prevent this. Abd al-Malik, to strengthen the border defences against future raids, rebuilt Mopsutia. This way, raids like Heraclius's could never happen again. In 702, the Armenians rebelled against the Arabs and forced them out. Tiberius sent additional forces to bolster the Armenian forces. Abdullah, the son of Abd al-Malik, came to Mopsuestia in 703 and fortified it. In 704, Abdullah attacked Armenia. Despite dogged fighting between the Romano-Armenian forces led by Heraclius and the Arabs, led by Muhammad, the Arabs defeated the Armenians and retook Armenia. They burned alive all of the Armenian ringleaders. In 703, Yazid Hunian led an Arab army against Cilicia and besieged Sis. Heraclius broke the siege and crushed Yazid's army, inflicting an estimated 12,000 casualties. It was also in this year that Justinian II made preparations to retake the throne and fled to the Khazar Kargan. In 705, Tiberius III heard that Justinian II was preparing to retake his throne. Tiberius recalled Heraclius from the east and prepared the defences. Justinian and his Bulgar ally Tervel outmaneuvered Heraclius and reached Constantinople without engaging his troops. Justinian besieged Constantinople for 3 days before leading the Bulgars along the abandoned aqueduct of Valens. They slipped past the guards and quickly occupied the capital. Tiberius fled to Caesopolis, but his army, seeing the change in Tiberius's fortunes, deserted him. Justinian captured Tiberius and immediately impaled his brother Heraclius and Tiberius's loyal officers on the Theodosian walls, as well as executing other Tiberian loyalists. Theophanes recounts the retribution of Justinian II on Leontius and Tiberius III. Theophanes the Confessor, Chronicle, Annus Mundi 6197, AD 705, page 375. As far as Apsimaros and Leontius, he caused them to be paraded in chains through the whole city, and while games were being held in the Hippodrome, and he himself was sitting on the throne, they were dragged publicly and thrown at his feet, and he trod on their necks until the end of the first race, while the people cried, "You have set your foot on the asp and the basilisk, and you have trodden on the lion and the serpent." He then sent them to the Kynegion to be beheaded. An interesting story from the reign of Tiberius III is reported by Theophanes concerning the future emperor Philippikos. Theophanes the Confessor, Chronicle, Annus Mundi, 6194, AD 701, page 372. Apsimaros exiled Philippikos, the son of the patrician Nicephorus, to Cephalonia, because he was dreaming of becoming emperor, for he claimed to have seen in a dream that his head was shadowed by an eagle. When the emperor had heard this, he immediately banished him. Clearly the situation for the Eastern Roman Empire was deteriorating fast. Armenia was lost despite efforts. The Arabs frequently encroached on the defences. The Arabs had recovered from their catastrophic defeat by Constantine IV, and with the whole caliphate united with the end of the Second Civil War, all of their attention could be focused on the Romans. Heraclius seems to have been a good choice as a general, but Tiberius himself seems to have failed as emperor to properly prepare to resist the greater pressure the Arabs were now able to bring to bear on the Romans. His extension of the strategia in Sardinia and Sicily, though beneficial, seems more of a consolidation of affairs in the west after the loss of Africa. Perhaps Tiberius III Apsimaros's main achievement was that had it not been for Justinian II, he may have succeeded in replacing the Heraclian dynasty, since he managed to hold power for 7 years without any recorded internal rebellions. This was the longest reign out of the emperors between the first deposition of Justinian II and the ascension of Leo III. Having agitated for a return, escaped from Cherson to the Khazar Kargan after the governor conspired to arrest him, married a Khazar princess baptized Theodora, and fleeing from the Kargan, crossed the sea, persuaded Khan Tervel to aid him, and successfully retook the capital and thereby his throne, Justinian II's comeback from disgrace is one of daring, tenacity, and admiration. Ruling from 705 to 711, his first action as emperor was to bring his wife Theodora and his son Tiberius back from Caesarea. On his return, he blinded and exiled the patriarch Callinicus and replaced him with Cyrus. He executed Tiberius III and Leontius, as well as all of Tiberius's supporters. However, he did show clemency to Tiberius Apsimar's son, who he exiled to church life. Some of these punishments were justified. Tiberius and Leontius had both been usurpers and were thus executed. Blinding the patriarch and eliminating all of Tiberius's loyal officers and officials was less justified. In 707, Musalama invaded Cappadocia and sacked Tyana. Justinian sent 2 strategoi to deal with Musalama, but they were resoundingly defeated. In 708, Justinian himself led a force against the Bulgars, his former allies, and was defeated. Meanwhile, Musalama attacked and took a number of forts in the Anatolian interior, defeated the Roman relief force near Amorium, and then raided Isauria, the mountainous region above Cilicia. In 709, there was serious unrest in Ravenna, the capital of Byzantine Italy. In 710, the Roman garrison in Cherson in the Crimea rebelled against Justinian, even gaining aid from the Khazars. Justinian responded by sending a fleet led by Stephen the Patrician to crush the rebellion, which he did. Stephen executed some Chersonites, but as he was sailing back to Constantinople, his fleet was wrecked in a storm. Cherson then again rebelled and was again aided by the Khazars. Meanwhile, Justinian had to deal with unrest in Rome. To help rectify animosity in the west, Justinian summoned Pope Constantine to Constantinople. In a rare instance of compromise, in 711, Justinian agreed with Constantine that he did not have to follow any decision of the Quinisex Council of 692 that the papacy found objectionable. Lazica, which had been regained by Tiberius III, having been lost under Leontius, was yet again lost to the Arabs when the princes of Lazica and Abaskia defected to the Caliph. Justinian sent a small expedition led by Leo the Isaurian, the future emperor, to Lazica, which succeeded in re-establishing Roman suzerainty in Abascia. The same year, Justinian sent the Logothete George in an embassy to Cherson to negotiate with the rebels. George, however, was killed by the Chersonites, who proclaimed an Armenian official exiled by Tiberius III as emperor. Bardanes, renamed Philippikos, defeated the expedition led by Maurus the patrician to Cherson. Maurus then joined Philippikos. Philippikos then set sail for Constantinople. Meanwhile, Justinian had managed to gain a peace with Tervel and had been lent 3,000 Bulgars. With these allies and the Opsikion and Thraxikion armies, Justinian made his headquarters at Sinope to react to any breach in the defences, as the Arabs were relentlessly striking at the Roman frontier in Anatolia, Cilicia, Armenia and Lazica. Instead, Justinian raced back to Constantinople, having heard that Maurus had been defeated and Philippikos was sailing to Constantinople. Despite his best efforts, Justinian reached Chalcedon just as Philippikos sailed into Constantinople. The usurper murdered Justinian's boy, Tiberius, and executed Justinian's chief officials. With Constantinople secure, Philippikos marched on Chalcedon. Philippikos promised to let Justinian's men have amnesty if they deserted Justinian, which they soon did. Justinian was captured and beheaded. His head was displayed at Ravenna and Rome to prove he was dead. Warren Treadgold says of the second reign of Justinian II, and thus the close of the Heraclian dynasty, Warren Treadgold, A History of the Byzantine State and Society, page 342. Justinian's second fall was due not so much to his excesses, which during his second reign were not great, as to the uncertainties caused by the three revolutions before it. The fourth revolution made matters even worse, destroying whatever remained of dynastic legitimacy. Philippikos evidently tried to justify himself by circulating an account of the expeditions to Cherson that exaggerated Justinian's cruelty and folly. But Philippikos had outdone Justinian in savagery by killing not only his predecessor's advisors, but also his son besides. With the death of Justinian II, thus closed the Heraclian dynasty, which had lasted for most of the 7th century. Ruling from 711 to 713, Philippikos Bardanes, having defeated Justinian II near Chalcedon, executed the emperor and murdered Justinian's son Tiberius in November 711. He immediately wanted to re-establish monothelitism. In 712, Philippikos deposed the patriarch Cyrus, who defended the Sixth Ecumenical Council, which Constantine IV had called condemning monothelitism as a heresy. Cyrus was replaced by the patriarch John. Philippikos then anathematized the Sixth Council, thus re-establishing monothelitism. The Orthodox clergy reluctantly accepted this, as the empire needed unity in a time of anarchy. Branding the emperor a heretic would hardly help matters. And with Philippikos' clear lack of clemency for the helpless, resistance would likely lead to their own deaths. Later that year, Musalama completed the conquest of all Cilicia and all Roman land east of the Euphrates. Philippikos expelled Armenian refugees from the empire, where they settled in the region of Melitines. The Anti-Taurus Mountains became the new frontier of the empire, with the collapse of the Taurus to Arab control. The Arabs penetrated into Anatolia, sacking Amasia and Misthia, remaining in the latter for winter. Their rage reached as far as Gangra. Meanwhile, the Bulgars raided into Thrace and came within sight of Constantinople. With Justinian II dead, their alliance with the Roman Empire had now ceased to be. In 713, the Arabs captured Pisidian Antioch. The Bulgars launched another raid, and a riot in Rome over the anathematization of the Sixth Ecumenical Council saw Philippikos' officials expelled from the Eternal City, much like Justinian II's were when he tried to enforce the Quinisex Council in Rome. In May, Philippikos celebrated the birthday of Constantinople. perhaps the one success of his reign. Philippikos' disastrous reign could no longer continue. Count George Barathus of the Opsikion Strategia, who had led the Phlegmatic troops to ward off the Bulgars in Thrace, sent his officers to the capital on the eve of Pentecost in June. They seized Philippikos while he napped and blinded him. This mutilation was considered far more serious than the loss of a nose or slitting of a tongue. This was likely due to the fact that Justinian II, despite having both his nose and tongue slit, he was able to return to power and hold it for several years because he was the legitimate emperor. Evidently, these mutilations were not enough to permanently bar a man from the throne. However, there was not to be an Emperor George. When Count George's loyalists announced the news of the deposition of Philippikos to the mob at the Hagia Sophia, the people clamoured for the head of the imperial chancery, the proto-secretus Artemius, to become emperor. The Emperor Artemius exiled Philippikos Bardanes to a monastery, and by 714, Philippikos was dead. Ruthless in his seizure of power, and completely lax when he held the reins of it, Philippikos Bardanes was a poor emperor, who caused unnecessary upheaval with the brief revival of monothelitism and unsatisfactory response to the incredibly serious dangers hitting the Asian and European limits of the empire. His short reign can be owed to the destabilization of the empire after Justinian II's first reign, as well as his total lack of ability as a ruler. To me, he seems to have been the very worst of the emperors that held the Eastern Roman throne between Justinian II and Leo III. Ruling from 713 to 715, Artemius, being a bureaucrat, took the regal name Anastasius, after the highly successful Anastasius I, who reigned from the late 5th to early 6th centuries. For the rest of 713, Anastasius II had to remove the men most threatening to his power, and so he blinded and exiled Theodosius Myakes, who was the officer who blinded Philippikos. A week later, Anastasius also blinded and exiled Count George Barathus, who had instigated the plot to remove Philippikos Bardanes. Both were exiled to a monastery in Thessalonica. Then Anastasius had to deal with Philippikos, who was still in the capital. Anastasius exiled him to a monastery in Constantinople, where Philippikos probably died in 714. Anastasius immediately reinstituted the anathematized Sixth Ecumenical Council, burying forever the spectre of monothelitism. Anastasius, a man with apparent prudence and perception, replaced most of the strategoi that had served Philippikos. One of his appointments was Leo the Isaurian to the Anatolikon Strategia. Leo had retaken Abaskia for Justinian II, with a small force, and thus it appears that Anastasius made similar appointments based on merit. With his position consolidated, Anastasius attempted to negotiate with the Caliph al-Walid. Meanwhile, Musalama raided into Galatia in 714. The ambassadors returned to inform Anastasius that the Caliph was planning a full-scale land and sea invasion of the Eastern Roman Empire. Anastasius realized that the cornerstone of the entire empire was the Queen of Cities, Constantinople, and that was where the hammer would fall. Thus, he repaired the city's walls and fully stocked the warehouses with supplies in preparation for a forthcoming siege. Anastasius also completed the sea walls so that the entire city was now encircled on all sides with walls matching the strength of the land walls. Despite the death of Caliph Walid in 715, his brother Suleiman continued the preparations for the invasion. In the spring of 715, Anastasius sent the fleet and thematic armies, commanded by the Logothete John the Deacon, to Rhodes, to head off the Arab Armada which was on its way to Phoenix, which intended to cut down lumber to build more ships. By May, the elements of the Opsikion thematic troops on Rhodes rebelled, and the rest of the forces dispersed. The Opsikion troops probably still resented the blinding and exile of Count George Boothus in 713. They sailed to Adramyttium in Thrixikion Strategia. Theophanes recounts the proclamation of Theodosius III. Theophanes the Confessor, Chronicle, Annus Mundi 6207, AD 714 to 715, page 385 to 386. When they had come to Adramyttion, being leaderless, they found there a local man called Theodosius, who was a collector of taxes, an idle and ordinary fellow, whom they urged to become emperor. He ran away and hid on a mountain, but they found him and acclaimed him emperor by force. Much the same story is recounted by Nicephorus the Patriarch. On the eve of the Arab invasion, the Eastern Romans descended into civil war between Anastasius II and the Opsikion troops headed by Theodosius III. Anastasius marched to Nicaea to confront the Opsikion troops. The Opsikion Thermata and Gotha Graeci sailed to Chrysopolis and attacked Constantinople by sea, and later crossing over to Thrace by land as well. In August 715, Germanus, Metropolitan of Cyzicus, was elected Patriarch of Constantinople. For 6 months, the Theodosian rebels besieged Constantinople, which, through trickery, they captured in November 715. Entering through the walls of the Balakanae and, as Theophanes describes, see the previous reference, the lawless soldiers of Opsikion and the Gotho Graeci raided by night houses of the citizens and wrought great havoc without respect for anything. They arrested Artemius's officers who were in the city, as well as Germanus, Patriarch of Constantinople, and brought them to Nicaea as evidence before Artemius and his companions. With his own officers and the Patriarch brought as evidence to Anastasius, still in Nicaea, he saw he had lost the war, and after obtaining a guarantee from Theodosius that he would not be harmed, he abdicated and entered a monastery at Thessalonica as a monk. Anastasius II was a highly competent emperor who was haunted by the instability of the empire. His elimination of the threat of Count George, though prudent and necessary for stability, would ultimately lead to his own deposition. His preparation of Constantinople for the oncoming onslaught of the Arabs played a vital role in Leo III's defense of the city. It is unknown what Anastasius was doing in Nicaea for the 6 months that the Opsikion troops besieged Constantinople. It might be speculated that he did not have enough men to defeat Theodosius without pulling men from the front, which would be suicidal. In any case, Anastasius II Artemius proved to be a strong and prudent emperor, hamstrung by his circumstances. Ruling from 715 to 717, Theodosius's merciful treatment of Anastasius II may have been enough to have cemented his regime had its foundations not lain on such uncertain ground. He was emperor by virtue of the Opsikion Thermata, and that was his only claim to legitimacy, being nothing more than a tax collector. Anastasius II had been no tyrant. Unsurprisingly, the Anatolikon strategos, Leo the Isaurian, a nominal loyalist of Anastasius, and his loyal ally Artabasdos, strategos of the Armeniakon strategia, rebelled against Theodosius III in 716. It is postulated by Graham Sumner that this Theodosius III was related to the Emperor Tiberius III Apsimar, thus giving him a link to the throne. Sumner speculates that this might explain why the Opsikion troops chose a seemingly random man to become emperor. Alternatively, Theodosius's father may have simply shared the same name as the late emperor, and it is mere coincidence. It is impossible to truly know for certain. It was in 715, following the deposition of Anastasius, that Leo the Isaurian married his daughter Anna to Artabasdos, who, after Leo's death, would fight a civil war with Leo's son, Constantine V, for the throne. By 716, the situation was bleak. perhaps even more so than the invasion during the reign of Constantine IV, and perhaps comparable in magnitude compared to the Persian siege of Constantinople under Heraclius. Nicephorus the Patriarch speaks of the descent of the Eastern Roman Empire to near total anarchy and destruction. Nicephorus I, Patriarch of Constantinople, Short History, Chapter 52. On account of the frequent assumptions of imperial power and the prevalence of usurpation, the affairs of the empire and the city were being neglected and declined. Furthermore, education was being destroyed, and military organization crumbled. As a result, the enemy were able to overrun the Roman state with impunity and to cause much slaughter, abduction, and the capture of cities. For this reason, also, the Saracens advanced on the imperial city itself, sending forth by land an innumerable host of horse and foot from the various peoples subject to them, as well as a great fleet numbering as many as 1,800 ships under the command of a certain Messalamus. When the military and civil dignitaries became aware of these matters, taking account of Theodosius's lack of experience and his incapacity of offering resistance to the enemy, they pressed him with exhortations to abdicate the imperial office and assume, without harm, a private station. He accordingly withdrew after a reign of 1 year. The Arabs had launched their fleet, which was bound for Constantinople, and they already had 2 armies under the command of Suleiman and Messalama invading through Anatolia. Leo the Isaurian managed, through some duplicitous negotiations on both sides, managed to prevent the Arabs from taking Amorian. With the Arabs stalled on the land while they wintered, Leo marched to Nicomedia and stumbled across Theodosius' son, along with the imperial household and palace dignitaries. In 717, Leo then marched to Chrysopolis. Theodosius III consulted the Senate and the Patriarch Germanus on what he should do, and decided to ask of Leo the same terms that he had offered Anastasius II, that he would abdicate if he and his son were not harmed. Leo agreed to the demands that the Patriarch presented him, and thus Theodosius III and his son became clergymen, and left the defence of the empire to a far more capable and enthusiastic Emperor Leo III. Theodosius' story does not end there. Sumner speculated that a certain Theodosius the son of Apsimar was Bishop of Ephesus and a councillor of Leo III in 729. Another Theodosius, son of Apsimar, was again mentioned as being the Bishop of Ephesus and a leading figure in the Iconoclast Council held by Constantine V in 754. It is this association with Theodosius III, with Bishop Theodosius the son of Apsimar, that gave Sumner the idea that he could be the son of Tiberius III Apsimar. This Theodosius died that same year. However, Cyril Mango and Roger Scott are not convinced of this, and explain why in the notes to Theophanes' chronicle Annus Mundi 6207. Firstly, he would survive nearly 40 years after his abdication, which, although not impossible, was not very likely. There is no mention that Bishop Theodosius was a former emperor, which the sources most certainly would have. This assumption would also make Theodosius an iconoclast heretic, which iconophiles said worked miracles, which is very unlikely. Adding to this, he was remembered for being very pious, something no iconoclast would have been praised for. Mango and Scott conclude that Theodosius did die at Ephesus, but as a member of the clergy and not a bishop. He was buried in the church of St. Philip, next to the city's harbour. Thus, it is likely that Theodosius III really was a nobody tax collector that was in the right place at the right time. Even so, out of the emperors that reigned after the death of Constantine IV, until the return to dynastic stability under Leo III, it was Theodosius III that managed to outlive them all. And in this, one can have some admiration for this emperor. I have been your host, Daniel Maynard, and this has been Eastern Roman History.